They always called me a princess, as if it were a compliment, an achievement, an inevitable destiny. But growing up in a modern palace, surrounded by cameras, speeches, alliances, and diplomatic smiles, didn't make me feel special. It only made me feel trapped. Every gesture of mine was watched, every word reviewed, every outfit chosen by someone else. I was the living symbol of a dynasty built on image and influence. The perfect daughter, the strategic heir, the chess piece everyone protected but never asked if it wanted to be in the game. And the more the world applauded me on the outside, the more I withered within. My face smiled with surgical precision, but my soul crouched in a dark corner of my chest, begging for air. The night it all began, I didn't want to escape forever. I just wanted to feel real for an hour, to walk without being followed, to breathe without surveillance, to exist without a schedule. But the world that raised me doesn't tolerate cracks, and when you're born inside a golden cage, any attempt to fly feels like a threat. It was on that edge, between impulse and fear, that I found him. He was where no one should have been, yet he seemed to belong more to my life than anyone with my last name. His gaze didn't demand anything from me. It didn't judge. It simply saw me. And in that instant when our eyes met, I knew something inside me had changed. Not because of him, but because, for the first time, someone looked at me without wanting to control me. And in that world, that was the start of a revolution. At first I thought he was just another security guard, one of those who patrol the perimeter as if every bush hides a threat to our pristine image. He was dressed simply, no badges, no expression. But there was something in the way he watched me, with attention, not authority. He saw me before I even tried to climb the side fence of the garden. And when I approached the lowest part, certain no one would follow me there, I felt the weight of his gaze settle on my back, silently saying it was already too late to slip away unseen. I turned, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from embarrassment. I expected an order, a reprimand, a threat, but he just stood there still, looking at me with an odd, almost irritating calm. He didn't approach. He didn't grab his radio. After a few long seconds, he only said, "You know if you keep going, no one's coming to get you." That sentence cut through me, not because of the tone, but because of its certainty. It was true. I knew it. If I disappeared, it'd be a crisis. Not for me, but for the image. They'd scream about the scandal, the loss, the stain on the family's reputation. But they wouldn't come after me as a daughter, as a person. And there, in front of a stranger who knew me without knowing my name, I felt a shame I'd never felt before, not for running, but for not knowing what to do with the freedom I'd craved my whole life. "Are you going to stop me?" I asked, half challenging, half pleading for an excuse to turn back. He shrugged. "I don't need to. You're already turning around." And I was. I took 2 steps back without realizing it. My feet felt heavy. My chest, too. The fence, which moments before had seemed like an invitation, now felt like a mirror. I saw myself there, polished, contained, tired, pretending boldness while fearing the fall. But what stuck with me most from that night wasn't the failed escape. It was the way he turned his back without asking for explanations, as if he'd understood everything I didn't say. The next day, when I saw him again, pretending not to recognize me while keeping his distance in the hallways of my family's foundation building, I realized something between us had been awakened. Nothing was said. But there, in glances that darted away at just the right moment and silences that spoke louder than full sentences, something began. Something I knew from the very first moment wouldn't fit within the rules I'd been taught to follow. I thought he'd vanish after that night. Like everything that unsettles me, quickly swept under my family's well-decorated rugs. But the next morning, there he was, standing naturally among the security team, as if he'd always been there, invisible to those who only see badges, hierarchy, and clean records. But to me, he was impossible to ignore. Not because he was handsome, not because he saved me from some grand catastrophe, but because he was the first man in that environment who didn't try to shape me, seduce me, or dissect me. He simply saw me. And in that world of cold appearances and masked intentions, that was the most disarming gesture anyone could offer. I started watching him more than I wanted to. I noticed how he kept a certain distance from everyone, how he spoke little but listened much, how his eyes were always alert, yet his expression was calm. There was something dangerous about him, not the kind that threatens, but the kind that knows real danger and therefore knows when not to react. And that contrast intrigued me, drew me in. For the first time, I didn't want to be perceived as the perfect woman to escort to a gala dinner. I wanted to be read, discovered, and with him, I started to believe that was possible. Our encounters grew through shared silences. We barely spoke. Sometimes he'd pass me in the garden while I pretended to read a book I never opened. Other times our eyes would meet in the administrative wing's hallway, and he'd just nod, as if saying, "I'm here," without implicating anyone. But each of those moments left me on edge, not from fear, from anticipation, as if the whole world could collapse beneath our feet at any moment, and even so, I wouldn't want to leave. One afternoon, at a meeting with investors, my father praised me publicly, said I was exemplary, prepared, born to represent our lineage's values. My face froze in an automatic smile, while inside, all I could think of was the night I tried to climb the fence. That gaze that didn't demand performance. The brief, sweaty taste of freedom when he said no one would come for me. And I realized there that I no longer wanted to be called exemplary. I wanted to be called real, even if it cost everything they'd built around me. The following week, I found him sitting alone at the back of the foundation, a place no one frequented. Maybe that's why I went there. He had a water bottle and a notebook, which he discreetly closed when he saw me. I thought about leaving, but he just looked up and said in a low voice, "You don't need to run. You just need to know when to stop pretending you're safe." That unraveled me, because no one had ever said that to me. Everyone always wanted to protect me, but no one ever had the courage to admit that the place they said was safe was, in fact, where I lost myself most. I sat beside him. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry either. But in that silence, with the distant sound of the city in the background and the weight of my own secrets slipping off my shoulders, I felt something shifting, not just between us, but within me. And this time, I didn't want to stop it. The worst part of living in a golden prison is that you start convincing yourself there's nothing wrong with the bars. And when you finally realize you're trapped, you don't know if you're more afraid of leaving or of what you'll find outside. That's why it took me so long to admit, even to myself, that this man was becoming a mirror, and everything I saw in him made me see, for the first time, what I lacked. He never said much, but his silences filled the space around me with a dangerous sense of choice. And in a world where everything was always decided for me, the simple right to choose who to look at was already a revolution. I started making excuses to find him. I'd say I needed air, wanted to walk alone, didn't feel well at meetings, anything to escape for half an hour from the version of me they'd invented. And he never asked why. He just followed at a distance, as if he knew exactly how far he could go without making me retreat. And that made me want to get closer. Because the world around me was always made of invisible fences. But he was space. He was a breach. He was risk. One day I caught him drawing. He was sitting at the corner of a service stairwell, a black-covered notebook in his lap, and a charcoal pencil between his fingers. I stood quietly for a few seconds, watching. He was sketching trees, but not perfectly. Some had broken branches, others disheveled leaves, and yet they were beautiful. I wanted to ask why he did it, if he'd studied art, or if it was just an escape. But what came out of my mouth was something else. Do you think everyone has a way to escape, even when they seem trapped? He stopped, looked up, and stared at me the way he did the first time. Direct, calm, deep. No. Some people prefer to get used to it. I stood still. It wasn't said as a criticism, it was a statement, a mirror. And in that moment, I realized what he saw in me. Someone still deciding whether to escape or keep adjusting to the prison. After that day, I stopped denying it. Stopped pretending our conversations were accidental, that our glances were distractions. And above all, I stopped pretending he was just another name among the many who passed through my life without leaving a mark. Because he already was more, even if I didn't have the courage to say it out loud. The moment everything truly changed was the night my mother called me to her room and asked, her tone cold, as if she already knew the answer. "Are you getting involved with someone?" I hesitated, thought about lying, laughing it off, denying it. But for the first time, I couldn't, because part of me wanted it to be true. Part of me already loved the idea of being involved with someone who didn't fit the script, who wasn't suitable, who wouldn't be accepted. And maybe deep down, that's exactly why he was becoming so essential. So I didn't answer, and the silence was answer enough. That night, alone on the back balcony, staring at the city lights and feeling my heart weigh as if it carried a lifetime of versions of me, I knew there was no turning back. Something had broken inside me, something that wouldn't mend with an apology or an obedient smile. I was going. Slowly, maybe, but I was going. And he was the only thing that felt real in the midst of it all. Everything shifted when I stopped caring if anyone saw. Not with kisses or bold gestures. None of that had happened between us yet. But with my eyes, with how I looked at him when he entered a room where everyone else seemed to just pass through. With how he listened to me, even when I said nothing. Over time, I stopped measuring my glances. I noticed it when one of my mother's aides gave me one of those crooked smiles and asked, with fake sweetness, if I'd been distracted by things that shouldn't occupy a young woman like me. I smiled back. But inside, it didn't bother me anymore, because I'd found something that made everything else feel like noise, the sensation that near him I could exist wholly, without effort, without posing. We started talking more. Long, aimless conversations stitched together with pauses and truths I didn't know I still carried. He told me about rural Texas, where he grew up learning to hunt and escape silences bigger than himself, about his time in the military, and how he came back different, as if part of him had stayed there, buried in sand no one can scrub from, the soul. I listened. Sometimes I didn't know what to say, but he never asked for replies. He just needed someone to stay, and that I could do, because somehow it was exactly what I needed too. Someone who didn't expect me to say the right words, just something true. With him, I began testing small boundaries, nothing that would draw the attention of security or the press. But to me, they were fireworks. I started declining invitations to events once deemed unmissable. I arrived late to an important family dinner, on purpose. I was spotted without permission at the market across the street, wearing worn-out jeans and my hair messily tied back. And the world didn't end. The palace didn't crumble. The sun rose the next day, as always. But inside me, each of those acts left a trace, and at the end of each of those days, there he was, quiet, attentive, a silent reflection of the freedom I was beginning to taste. But the closer I got to him, the clearer the distance between us became. It wasn't just my last name, his role, or the fact that our connection was, in itself, an affront to everything my family stood for. It was the idea that to him I might still be a trap, something that would bring pain, and sometimes I saw it in his eyes, when I laughed too loudly, when I spoke of plans that didn't exist, when I lingered too long. He'd look away as if remembering none of this was safe, but he never left, never did. And that constant choice to stay, even when it'd be easier to go, was what made me trust him more than anyone who'd ever sworn to protect me. Still, something began to shift, small but steady. Sharper glances, offhand remarks, the subtle presence of someone tailing me outside the schedule, the kind of surveillance masked as concern. And I knew. I knew my mother wasn't sleeping easy anymore, that my father had asked discreet questions, and that soon someone would come to me, not with orders, but with warnings. And warnings in that world always came with a cost. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. It was on a Saturday afternoon that everything started. Sleeping for good. I was returning from a brief meeting with him, a hidden coffee, 2 streets beyond the allowed perimeter, when I found my mother sitting alone in my room, an envelope in her hands. Nothing in her posture seemed out of place, but her eyes said, "It all." She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't make a scene. She just slid the envelope toward me as if wanting to be rid of it. Inside were photos, printed on high-quality paper, sharp, well-framed, taken with the kind of lens only someone with much to hide or much to prove knows how to use. In every one, I was with him, on a park bench, in the hallway of the Social Projects Restoration Center, in the car, head down, smiling, always smiling. My mother took a deep breath before speaking. Her voice came out clear, steady, as if rehearsed. For this moment, do you have any idea what you're doing? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't know, but because any response I gave then would sound like defiance. And in that moment, I didn't want to defy. I just wanted to be heard without being turned into a disappointment. It's not just about you. It's about all of us. It's about what we've built, what we represent. Do you understand? Yes. I understood. I always had, since childhood, since my first steps under the spotlight, since the forced smiles, since the handshakes, with people who spoke of me like I was a prize to display. The problem was, now I understood something else too, that none of it mattered if I couldn't choose who I was beyond the applause. When she left the room, something in me broke, not with anger, with relief, because there was no more pretending nothing was happening. And I'd rather face their fury than keep hiding the one place in my life where I could breathe. In the days that followed, everything changed. Security doubled. My access to certain areas was suspended for technical reasons. A new aide was assigned to shadow me, someone too friendly to be harmless. My speech scripts were represented as if I'd forgotten how to smile and nod. And in the background, my family's eyes surrounded me with the rigid tenderness of those who say they love, but only if I obey. Even so, I found him. Late, nervous, hidden among shadows we already knew well. When I got there, he already knew. "Did they come talk to you?" I asked, voice low. He nodded. "They said I was crossing lines." "And are you?" He looked at me for a second too long. "No, but you are, and they won't let it slide." In that moment, I realized he was scared too, not for himself, for me, and that hit me harder than any threat. He could handle the world turning against him, but he couldn't bear the thought of my world crashing down on me, "Do you want me to leave?" I asked. And the question came out laced with pain, because part of me already knew the answer. But he shook his head slowly. "I want you to stay because you want to, even knowing it won't be easy." And I stayed. That night, for the first time, we touched, not as an escape, not as forbidden passion, but as two people too tired of pretending they weren't loving each other in silence. It was a simple gesture, the back of my hand against his chest. Our breaths caught between us. No kiss, no promises, just truth. The whole raw, brave truth. And when I got home, knowing someone would see, someone would tell, someone would try to erase it all, even then I slept in peace. Because loving someone in their world demands obedience. But loving someone in mine demands courage. I knew it was coming. The fall, the moment the silence would end, when the eyes that pretended not to see would start pointing. But what I didn't know was how much it would hurt. Not from the exposure, but from the cowardice of those who say they love you until you shame them. There was no public scandal. They're too good for that. They don't shout, don't cry. Behind closed doors, don't smash glasses or make scenes. They destroy in silence. They canceled my speech at an international conference last minute, removed my image from the charity campaign, claiming it'd be more strategic to feature neutral faces, postponed engagements, suspended projects, and when I confronted my father directly, he looked me in the eye as if he didn't recognize me. "You're free to do what you want," he said, "but you have to face what that means." That sentence was the final blow. Not for its content, but for its delivery. He spoke like he was closing a deal, like he was serving an eviction notice. My father, the man who smiles on every magazine cover as an ambassador of ethics, said it with the calm of someone signing an exile. And I left that room feeling like I just lost a war I hadn't even started. That same week, he was sidelined. Not officially, but I felt it in the forced smiles of allies, in the calls that once came daily and now fell silent. I was the risk, the disobedient daughter, the one who traded stability for a man without an influential name. And even if he didn't say it aloud, I saw it in his eyes. He blamed me for everything. For the crack, for the loss of power, for the fragility of the image. When I told Kyle, yes, now I called him by his full name, with the intimacy of someone who feels he lives in parts of you didn't even know. He didn't try to console me, didn't say it'd all be okay. He just said, they didn't lose because of you. They lost because they didn't know what to do when someone from their own house chose truth. And I cried there in his arms like a child, because I finally understood what was at stake. It wasn't just love. It was everything it represented. The choice to love someone for who they are, not what they could give me. To love without an agenda, without a contract, without advantage. And that, in that world, was unforgivable. In the days that followed, I started packing my things. Not because I was officially kicked out, but because staying no longer made sense. Every room in the house felt too small for what I was becoming. And when I decided to leave, without drama, without shouting, just with my suitcase and my conviction, my mother didn't try to stop me. She hugged me, hard, long, like someone who knows they can't follow but still doesn't want to let go. And when I closed the door behind me, I felt fear. So much fear, but also peace. A raw, painful, real peace. As if I'd finally been torn from the surface to breathe deeply. That night, he was waiting for me outside the city, in the same old car that sheltered me the first times I escaped for just a few hours. Now I wasn't escaping, I was going. And there was a huge difference between those two things. He looked at me. I got in the car, and we didn't say anything for a while. We just sat there, together, whole, alive. Freedom didn't come as I'd imagined. It wasn't light or pretty. It came with silence, with doubt, with sleepless nights in frameless rooms where I'd wake up startled, not quite sure who I was, just certain of who I didn't want to be anymore. The first days were strange. I, who'd grown up with timed schedules and calculated lives, found myself with no fixed hours, no mandatory makeup, no one asking where I was. And what should have been relief was, at first, disorientation. When no one controls you, you realize how used you are to being told what to do. Kyle, and now, yes, I said his name, with the intimacy of someone who no longer needed to hide, watched me from a distance, gave me space, didn't try to fill me. He understood that freedom is a territory no one can invade, not even in love. He stayed with me on mornings when I could only stare out the window, wordless. Held my hand when the crisis hit, when I missed the structure, even knowing it was. Never a home, just a showcase. He didn't say everything would be fine, and that, paradoxically, gave me peace. Because he trusted I'd rebuild myself in my own time. Little by little, I found my own rhythm. I started cooking simple things, as if trying to remember I had hands. I wrote in old notebooks, not speeches, not political lines, but loose, unaligned, true thoughts. I washed clothes, chose my own hours, went to the market with my head down, then with my head up. No one recognized me, and that hurt and relieved me at the same time, because being forgotten can be cruel, but being remembered the wrong way is too. With Kyle, everything grew quieter, more solid. We no longer lived in that tension of being found out. Now the challenge was different. Learning to be two when the world no longer demanded secrecy, just presence. There were rough patches, moments when my anger overflowed and he stepped back, moments when fear returned and I wanted to give up, go back to the comfort of the walls that choked me. But he didn't give in to my drama. He just waited, as always, with that quiet strength that threw me off balance. One night, we sat together by the edge of a deserted road. I looked at the darkness ahead. He looked at me. "Do you miss it?" he asked. I thought about lying, but it didn't make sense. Anymore. Sometimes. Not the lie. But the security, yes. He nodded. We sat in silence. Until he said, "Security isn't the same as truth. You chose truth. And that's scary. But it also sets you free." And in that moment I understood. It wasn't about being with him. It wasn't about being away from my family. It was about finally being with myself. Not to be perfect, but to be whole. With all the pain, all the losses, all the pieces I had to break, to discover that freedom isn't the absence of pain. It's the presence of choice. Over time, I realized freedom is a muscle, and living outside a structure that shaped you demands relearning even the simplest gestures. At first I wondered who I was without the red carpets, the prepared speeches, the approving or critical gazes. Now I ask something else. Who do I choose to be with all that behind me? There was no rush to find that answer, and maybe it wouldn't come precisely. What I knew was that little by little, the voice inside me grew clearer, the one that had always been there, muffled by vows, duties, and fear of disappointing. Now it spoke more sharply, and for the first time I listened, I went back to studying. Things I never had time to learn because they weren't part of the plan. Literature, philosophy, politics, but differently. Not the politics of ballrooms and promises, the politics of the self that shapes thought, sustains stance, builds a worldview. I started writing short pieces and signing them with my name. Not the princess's name, mine, full, without title, without reverence. My mother called a few times, at first with silence, then with short sentences, finally with care. I sensed in her something between pride and sadness, like someone who knows their daughter has grown, but that it required letting go of the girl she cared for so long. We haven't reunited yet, but there's no bitterness, just a necessary respectful distance between us. And maybe one day the reunion will come, when there's no longer a need to prove who's right. Kyle stayed by my side, not as a shadow, not as a hero, as a man, with flaws, with silence, with presence. I learned that truly loving someone means letting go of the idea that they'll save you, and accepting that often they'll just walk beside you as you learn to stand on your own. That's how it was with him. He never tried to erase the pain of my rupture. He just reminded me in the darkest moments that I'd survived it. One afternoon, as we walked aimlessly, he looked at me with that direct way of his and asked, "Do you regret it?" I stopped, looked around. There was nothing of what I had before. No mansion, no crowd, no certainty. Just the road, the wind, me. "I don't regret leaving," I said. "I regret taking so long." He smiled, and we kept going, together. But each on our own, because freedom, I discovered, isn't being with someone. It's being able to be with yourself, and still choosing to share the path. Today almost no one calls me princess anymore, and curiously that's what saved me. Not losing the title, but freeing myself from the need to carry it. Not living, to fit a mold, but to occupy my own space, even if it's small, imperfect, and just mine. I still hear my name whispered in circles that once exalted me. They say I've become someone else, that I went too far, that I traded everything for a man. But the truth is, I traded everything for myself. He just had the courage to look at me when I was already starting to see myself. Kyle and I live simple, days. And that simplicity at times still scares me, because I spent too long believing intensity was synonymous with love. But real love, the kind that remains when the applause fades, is made of quiet presence, steady hands, eyes that don't look away when everything falls apart. It's him listening when I get lost in my old demands, and it's me holding him when the past bleeds again. We rebuild without haste, and it's at that pace we go on. Never went back to that house, or the ceremonies, or the invitations. But every now and then, I get a letter from my mother, short, always signed with the affection she didn't know how to show when I was still the version everyone wanted. I think deep down, she's learning to free herself from the expectations that bound her for decades too. Maybe one day we'll meet again, woman to woman, no thrones between us. I'm no longer the woman they expected. I'm no longer the symbol they forged. I'm someone who fell, who loved, who disobeyed, who bled, and who survived her own awakening. And if I had to do it all again, I would. Because there's no prison more disguised than perfection. And there's no freedom truer than being able to say, "This is me, and it's for me that I stayed."